Utah Lake has always been generous. As the pioneers settled in and communities started springing up around the lake, residents soon realized that the lake had more than life-sustaining food to offer them.
Resorts started up on the Great Salt Lake, and people in Utah County took their cue from them and began resorts in Utah County on Utah Lake in the 1870s and 80s. Some of the earlier ones, like Saratoga, were begun in some form or another in the 70s, but most of them really took off during the 80s and 90s, and we had maybe 20 resorts surrounding the lake. So no matter what side of the lake you lived on, there was a place to go and bathe, meet with people. They did a lot of dancing. There were parties down there. There were pavilions for people to picnic under.
They held dances there, and I can remember a great deal of when they would do these dances all the time. And I remember that's where I learned to do the Charleston. It was a lot of fun. I thought that was just wonderful.
Many of the resorts had their own pools, which were fed by warm springs. People had their choice of either swimming in the lake or they could swim in the pools. You could take your choice. Some of the pools were enclosed. Most of them were outdoor pools, like at Geneva and Saratoga. There were ball fields there. Next to the Provo Lake Resort, there was a racetrack where people went down and indulged in betting on horses a little bit. They had evening programs. They had live orchestras that played. Most of the resorts had some kind of a little restaurant, but it was a place to go and mingle. Later on, again, after the airplane age was introduced to Utah Valley, we had people flying into the resorts, landing on the sandy beaches, and selling airplane rides to some of the customers who were at the resorts.
At Geneva, there was a great slide that we'd carry our carts up. We'd walk up all these stairs carrying this cart, then hook it in a rail, and then slide down a steep grade and scoot out over the water. If it was too front heavy, you'd dive down in the water. If it was back heavy, well, you went this way. But that's where I spent my young life, going to celebrations and dances and swimming and so forth.
During the resort heyday of the early 20th century, excursion boats such as the SS Showboat and Renon W set sail, taking passengers around to all of the lake resorts, out for a romantic dinner party cruise, or to dance to the orchestra on board.
The Showboat was a dream of my father and his good friend Elmer Smith. My father's name was Hewitt Strong. They called the boat the Smith and Strong Showboat. And it was 32 feet wide and 90 feet long, but they had to be able to build a boat that flowed in 14 or 16 inches of water and yet hold old people. So it was a flat bottom boat. So when they got the boat finished, and then they started advertising for parties and stuff, it didn't take long. It became very popular. In fact, the last few years it run, it was booked up for a year in advance for all the weekends and a lot of the weekdays.
And I remember taking my girl on this excursion when I was 17, and it was so romantic to be out there on that boat with your girlfriend. I was wishing I was old enough to be married.
It had a stage at one end of the boat and a kitchen and restrooms, and people would perform on the stage different vaudeville acts and so forth for the paying customers. And then they had large dances on the boat. Sometimes they had over 200 people on that boat, and it was a very nominal fee. You could go down, ride the boat, take your loved one out for a ride under the starry skies above Utah Lake, and dance away the evening for like 50 cents, something in that area. There wasn't very much entertainment in Provo at the time. We had 2 or 3 motion picture theaters and several bars, and that was about it. So Smith and Strong cashed in on what was a need for entertainment.
Grand times were had both on and off the SS Showboat. Aquatic programs were often staged for passengers. Indeed, the SS Showboat and Utah Lake were bright lights in the dark times of the Great Depression. A favorite destination for boat passengers was Bird Island. It was just 6 miles from the mouth of the Provo River, but at a cruising speed of 8 miles per hour, a round trip and a short visit to the island to look for bird eggs could take up to 4 hours.
If you walk through there, you had to watch where you step because they lay their eggs right in the rocks. And they take people out there and we tell them, be careful where you step. We took hundreds of people out there, and they'd walk down this, we'd go down the south side and they'd walk up the Long Peninsula into the bird area. So that island has been a very, very important place. Even right now, the biggest catfish and the biggest carp and everything else is right by the island.
It's been used by fishermen and duck hunters heavily through the years, and of course it was a drawing card for people who wanted to see something as strange as an island in Utah Lake when they rode out on the showboat.
Utah Lake was, and still is, a marvelous place for the nature enthusiast and sportsman. The lake is home to an array of waterfowl, many that migrate from the western Canadian prairies. Buffleheads and mergansers can be found in the marshes around her shoreline.
It's just great to see all this wildlife. That's always been a big love of mine on this lake. I fish all around the lake. In fact, if we can't find fish in one place, we usually just move from harbor to harbor to harbor or beach to beach. And we may cover 3, 4, 5, 6 places on the lake in a day. So I fish the lake about 20 times a year on the average since I was about 12 years old. It's treated me real good. The coolest thing about Utah Lake is that it probably has more different kinds of fish and fishermen than any other lake in the state of Utah. We like to fish this lake year-round, and the fish are just outstanding. It attracts a great diversity of people. The main reason I come down here really isn't to fish. I really enjoy fishing and catching walleye and all these other fish, but you know, the most fun is visiting with people, coming down here with friends, and just a great lake to come and just recreate on.
Some who grew up around Utah Lake have rarely left her side. Leaving the lake, in their minds, would be like losing an old friend. Don Hawk has lived every one of his 91 years here.
I live now within 2 blocks of where I was born. And I've lived not much further than that all my life. We moved up by the park. That's the furthest I've been from where I was born. We used to go swimming down the lake all the time. What we used to do is go skinny dipping. We built a little sailboat and used to go out in the lake on that. I remember one time they had a 4th of July the fireworks down to the lake, and we went out. We got us a boat and went out and watched the fireworks out from out in the lake. We used to, well, in the wintertime, we ice skated down there. That was, we ice skated out to Bird Island many times.
Ice skating was marvelous. I remember all through my high school years, we used to skate down there. We could skate as far as Bird Island and back, and sometimes the ice would be so clear. And then other times, of course, the waves underneath would create a disturbance, and quite often it would break up, and as young people will that are daring, we would jump the cracks of the ice as they split open, and we jumped from one to the other. It's a wonder we didn't drown, but we didn't. And so it proved to be just a wonderful winter time for a lot of us.
Roland Strong inherited his father's love of Utah Lake and was one of the first to surf its waters.
But the water sports have been good down there for years. We had we call it a surfboard. Somebody called it an aquaplane, but the board was hooked to the boat. A 3x5 piece of wood, plywood, and then you had two ropes coming back in the front. And you hook it to the boat, and you could get a good ride. Same way as they are now. Now, of course, they're jumping and doing flips and all this stuff, but you could do the same speed on a turn. You had to get back on the one corner, and you get that one corner, and you could spray water over for long ways. The only trouble was, if you fell off and the boat upside down and the rope pulled the other way, the board would dive. So you had to make sure you cut your arrangement fast. If somebody fell off, you'd put the thing in the mud.
During the late 1920s, informal speedboat races were held at Geneva Resort. And in the 1960s, Memorial Day weekend drew crowds from all over the country who reveled in watching the daring and the lightning fast captain their boats to victory.
Every Memorial Day, it was boat races down at the lake. And they would start in the harbor, and they would go out into the lake and race out there and then come back in. Well, the harbor was always filled with people. It was a big thing for Provo to have these boat races on Memorial Day.
It was not an exceedingly great place to race, unfortunately, because it's such a shallow lake that the winds stirred up the waves and made it pretty dangerous. I think it was for the national championships. One of the drivers perished. And from that time on, the boat races became less frequent. But during the 40s, it was a big thing. Thousands of people would go down to the old Provo boat harbor and watch those boat races, and it was exciting.
For generations, boaters and water skiers have gathered and played on Utah Lake. But over the years, the number of people visiting the lake has slowly decreased. Today, considering how close Utah Lake is to such a large population area, she is underutilized. For many, her enduring charm will never fade. The lake quietly goes on, proving her worth in countless ways.